Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Say Report. I'm your host, Devon Decker, and joining me, my host companion, Sejohn Sarwick. Sejohn?
Hey, what's going on, man? Hey, everybody.
Well, I'm glad you're in a good mood, because I have some bad, troubling news to
Always a good way
start
to
off
start.
this episode of the Say
Phenomenal.
Report.
Yeah, okay.
According to the season, nay, perhaps series finale of And Just Like That, I think we have to stop podcasting.
Oh no, was it? Is that like from HBO Direct or just from like someone on the show? What have we done? Who did we
Well,
piss
while
off?
we weren't called out directly, as cool as that would have been, like honestly, if Carrie Bradshaw turned to the camera dead-eye and was like, "The Say Report, you must stop. This is an official cease and desist."
Fuck you.
That would have been
Looks at
awesome.
the camera is just like screw them.
Yeah. And just like that, no more Say Report. But the reason why is Che, the podcasting partner that Carrie Bradshaw was working with, they got a pilot in LA and were going out to LA for pilot season like about a month, maybe 3 weeks to a month, and decided that that was the end of the podcast because apparently podcasts can't be done remotely. Apparently, the way that we've been doing it for now 264 episodes, plus a bunch of bonus material and a spin-off, you can't do that remotely. And that seems, well, it seems wrong. It also seems like kind of a bad move on the part of Che. Like, they don't understand the industry. It's also kind of like bad writing on the part of the writers of Just Like
I mean,
That.
like, yeah, let's get down to it. That's what really we're talking about here. Is that is such a dumb, like, inconvenient excuse to write them off the show.
Yeah,
Or at least that part of them off the show.
So, I mean, the stuff that I don't get... Now, I've only seen episode 5 and episode 10 of And Just Like That. I figured if I watch the 5th episode, I'm legally okay to watch the 10th episode without any further context.
Yeah. Oh,
Like,
no.
I'm just watching it for the 5s. And in fact, 5cast coming soon with Devon Decker and guests, where we watch just the multiple of 5 episodes of a series and see how that changes a series. It'll be really fun for those like 1-episode shows from CBS where you have
Ghosted.
13 episodes.
Imagine that.
Oh, Ghosted? Ghosted will probably be the most coherent show ever if you just watch the 5th, 10th, and 15th episode out of 16. I don't know.
Basically, it'll feel like a different show each time.
But I think that it'll make sense based on what is revealed in episode 15, why it feels so strange. So I guess, yeah, when this happens, that's the pilot right there. It's Ghosted. And I'll probably have Sejohn on because I'm already comfortable with you, Sejohn. But yeah, so I've only watched episode 5 and episode 10 of And Just Like That. And it's mostly for the same reason that both of these episodes lit up my frickin' timeline on Twitter like a pinball machine, right? Even Tommy, being deaf, dumb, and blind, could see the way that And Just Like That was lighting up my timeline. Pinball Wizard no more.
I keep leaning it. No, one more. You got to do one more.
Well, one more what? I don't know.
One more reference to Tommy. Come
To
on.
Tommy?
Yeah.
I don't really have any more. He walked in the movie. I've never seen the musical, but I imagine it's the same thing. Or maybe the movie's the only thing. Tommy is not really deaf, dumb, and blind. He's just in hysterical shock because he walked in on his uncle, and the huge air quotes there, fucking his mom. And then just from there, it was just catatonic.
Yeah.
So, it's a lie. It's a lie. It's a big fat producer on America's Got Talent, American Idol, the X Factor lie to get him sympathy that he is deaf, dumb, and blind and so good at pinball.
This is a lot to kind of ignore the fact that you seem to have a Twitter set up to only watch Sex in the City. My
Twitter is insane. The stuff that mostly Twitter thinks I'm British. I can only blame Will for that. Because I wake up to the morning and I have so many tweets from people in like the UK talking about things and being like, oh, I'm off to lunch. And I'm like, it's 8 o'clock. And then I'm like, oh no, it's lunchtime for them. Right. So I don't know how I've cultivated that. I have a lot of comedy Twitter, which makes a lot of sense because comedy is sort of the reason I got back on Twitter. I have a lot of like people of color Twitter as well. And I see the N-word a lot on Twitter, and that's just strange to me. And yeah, I guess if the fourth quadrant of this pizza is, and just like that, reactions from people. Like, and I guess is somebody who's less with it or less willing to embarrass themselves on their podcast would call it television Twitter, right? Like it's the TV nerd Twitter that's there. But no, only talking about and just like that. And the crazy thing is it's only been around for 10 episodes.
Yeah.
So it has eked out whatever that fourth quadrant was, probably video game Twitter. Yeah. Right? Which I don't mind. And here's like just the true is I don't give a shit about video game Twitter being replaced by and just like that Twitter at all. Bring it on. Bring on Miranda getting fingered in the kitchen while Carrie pisses the bed. I want it. I want it all the time.
I can't believe that is a plot point that people are going to be able to refer to now to the end of time. Like they cannot deny that was not a plot of an episode of this show. Oh,
yeah,
shit.
And that's the other thing
too.
So
what happened now, Dev? You're kind of burying the lead here.
Oh, okay, yeah. So Che gets the pilot. And it's apparently her show, right? Was the driving force behind XY Me, which was the name of the podcast that she did with Bobby Lee. They did with Bobby Lee, and I don't know Bobby Lee's character's name. And Bobby Lee, I know Bobby Lee in real life, so he's always just kind of Bobby Lee to me. And that's, sorry to drop that name, but it's just a fact, right? You get drunk with a guy in Nashville one night, that kind of cements your image of that guy. I'm sure that Bobby Lee on his podcast is talking about Devon Decker and how he's always Devon Decker, right? Maybe on XY Me. But so Che had done it with Bobby Lee, and then they invited Carrie Bradshaw in to sort of be like, she became a third host on it, but initially it was just to resurrect what she had been doing with the Sex and the City column, which was to answer people's problems on the podcast. So also the writers of And Just Like That seem to not fully grasp the fact that podcasting is rarely done live like a radio show.
Yeah. I mean, there is streaming that people will then take the audio of and release as a podcast, but like in that case, very often all of your gear and all of your business mindset and all of your like acumen is all shifted towards the streaming part. And then the idea that you just release the recorded audio later is like handled secondary, usually by an editor that has nothing really to do with you. Like there is a whole part of the industry that they should have just leaned into if that is going to be the format that they chose to introduce her to the show.
And again, just 2 episodes that I saw, so maybe they covered all this, but it really does feel like this is an audio-only podcast because they're essentially in a radio studio. It looks like Frasier. It looks like all that, and there are no cameras running, so they're treating it like it's a radio show, but we're calling it a podcast. And I guess it's easier to wrap your mind around, like the radio show, the producer in the other room who they're looking to, like, well, I guess that's our time. And it's like, is it your time? It's a podcast.
Well, it's not that there's not like podcast studios set up.
Right, exactly.
Like that particular style of recording and podcasting is something that maybe you do when you're in a very high echelon. I don't know if it's supposed to, I mean, it sounds like it's supposed to be in a very successful show. That's the other crazy thing about this is that if they canceled it on a whim because they got a pilot, this sounds like this is a show that has been not just like years in the making, but also like a lot of like, you have to be very dedicated to your show to be at this level at which you are in a studio like this.
Yeah, it's exactly. Like it feels like maybe it's even like a corporate sponsored thing or like with Sirius XM. Like I don't understand what they're trying to portray to me. And they show them recording an episode and it's not like a finale episode. It's just like a regular episode of XY Me. And they, at the end, after they've recorded, say, all right, so I'm done with this. And the producer goes, hey, it was always your show. And then Bobby Lee's like kind of mad about it. And like rightfully so. Because we built this show together. And even though you're leaving, does that really mean the show needs to end? Can I keep doing it with Carrie Bradshaw? Can I find another person? Like, but the real, like, what the fuck are you talking about here, Che, is you got a pilot, and good for you, but also, is that how Hollywood works still? That feels very 90s.
You know, do you know what would be a really good way to boost your pilot? Is having a podcast.
Yeah.
You know, the like #1 marketing tool for independent comedy out there
is podcasting. Yep. It's Twitter and podcasting, people. That's what you use. So it's really weird. She's like, well, I got the pilot. Fuck all these people who listen to me all the time on this successful show.
Built-in audience that I've already got.
Yep, I'm going to alienate the fuck out of them. But then the crazy thing about that is you now have no backup plan. Right? I'm going to...
Yeah, right. Because, I mean, how many pilots... We talked about this with the How I Met Your Father stuff, right?
Yeah.
How many pilots ever actually get picked up for show? Not many. Not many at all.
So, and even then, if you get a pilot, right? She gets the pilot and the show is successful. So maybe we're going back to... We're going to be releasing one a month because while I'm working on the show. Please watch the show. And then when you come back to X, Y, Me, I'll have stories from what it's like on set, what it's like working on TV, to the extent of what legal will let me share with you.
Yeah.
And you tell your audience that, and your audience, A, if they're as dedicated to you as... I imagine you'd have to have a pretty dedicated audience for a producer to come in and say, we want to offer you a pilot. It's not just, oh, we saw your set at the Comedy Basement and, oh my God, you're the funniest thing that TV needs right now. Because I don't think it works like that at all anymore. Like, no, it does not feel like, I don't really know. TV Twitter was never part of my 4 quadrants. And now it's in Just Like That. So it felt like somebody who didn't understand the importance of that podcast to Che's success to then just blow it out of the water. But it's okay, because at the end of the day, Carrie Bradshaw got to start her own podcast, and it's called Sex in the City. So maybe there'll be a season 2. But she made out with her producer.
What a fucking build-up to what we... like, what it's such an inevitable conclusion.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't be tied to this anymore. We kind of backdoor piloted you in.
Yeah.
I just want Bobby Lee to land on his feet. But
I was going to say, did she at least hire Bobby Lee?
No, Bobby Lee got married, and that's supposed to be his happy ending. Bobby Lee was, like, so pissed walking out. He's like, I can't believe she do this. She kind of just sprung it on me. But you know what? I'm over it. You know, I'm about moving forward. I don't want to live in the past. Are you coming to my party? And Carrie's like, party? And he's like, oh my God. Like, because also I feel like Bobby Lee's character is some sort of high functioning, like, genius based on purely what I saw from him on display in episode 10. In episode 5, I got none of that from his character. He just seemed like another comedian who was part of this podcast with Che. Yeah. And yeah, so that's the situation there. But he's like, oh my God, I'm so high functioning. I must have forgot to send you the invitation to this party, but you need to be there. And he gave Carrie all the information about the party, and Carrie goes to this party where the producer of the podcast, but not Che, because I think he's still a little upset about how things went. Oh, he said he was over it. Yeah, but come on. I think he's just a little upset that...
that everything just
you know that
shit.
Oh, good for you getting the pilot, but my life is now over and meaningless. I was just an extra in your journey. I hope that makes it into episode 1 of the Che Show.
Oh man.
Yeah, so then that party turned out to be a surprise wedding, which honestly, that's kind of how I want to do it. After having seen it, invite a bunch of people to a party, and then chink, chink, chink on your wine glass, and then, hello, ladies and gentlemen, it's a surprise wedding! And then, so Bobby Lee got married to his girlfriend, and that was his happy ending. And in a show like, and Just Like That, which is based on the ideals of Sex and the City, I'm fairly certain that is what is what is the happiest ending that could happen to any character on that show?
Yeah, until we come and do the 10 years later show when we learn how horrible that marriage is.
Right. Well, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to see Bobby Lee character ever again. But yeah, so at the wedding, Carrie, the producer, was like, no, you could do your own podcast. And then they did the podcast, and then they kissed in the elevator, and the elevator doors closed, and then credits. And it's like, hey, you know what? I'm not interested enough to go back and watch the rest of it. Visiting the 5th and 10th episode of this show, I think that was enough for me.
Moral of the story. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I gotta say, I'm very surprised at how kind of little I've heard about this show. Unlike you, waking up to it on your Twitter all the time. Part of it is because I'm just not on Twitter all the time. But the idea being that I haven't heard one way or the other much about this show. And I have people that, I remember we were friends with people that straight up would like steal the cardboard cutouts from the Sex and the City movie from the movie theater. Like that kind of like that relationship with the show around us. We've done this before. We've talked about it, how it wasn't ever anything you and I were like majorly into, but you couldn't avoid it, right? And so the idea that here we are with this sequel series that has come out, and I have literally heard hide nor hair about this show except here with you, is pretty telling to me at kind of its reception. The fact that it just could not make even a modicum of the same mark that the first show did is pretty unfortunate.
Well, they fucked up. Like the up, down, left, right, BA start of it all is they fucked up when they called it And Just Like That.
Mm-hmm.
They should have called it Sex and the City.
Yeah.
Like the after years. Or like Sex and the City, And Just Like That. By not having the Sex and the City brand recognition in the title of your show, why are people going to even know that's what it is?
Oh, you go real classy. You do Sex and the City Presents And Just Like That. And then you can call it And Just Like That going forward, but everybody will say, the full title.
Exactly. If you're on Jeopardy and you want to get the $1,000, what is Sex and the City Presents And Just Like That?
Yeah.
Though, I mean, that does kind of have a ring of American Pie Presents, and I'm not going to get Jason Biggs fucking a pie. I'm going to get, Ty Brickle playing bagpipes.
But, it implies the whole, like things have been changed up. The cast is not what it used to be. There's going to be story, It is just far enough removed that you don't expect the exact same thing, but also close enough that you can still lean into, like you're saying, lean into that built-in audience of Sex and the City, which they just never did. Yeah. Right.
And then that actually goes back to the How I Met Your Father of it all. How I Met Your Father clearly feels connected to How I Met Your Mother because mother, father, but How I Met Your Dad, the second you call it that, is like, man, that looks like the Kmart ripoff brand.
Yeah. Is this satire parody at this point? No. Oh, you're just doing the same thing. You just okay.
They weren't doing the exact same thing.
Well, no.
Yeah,
all right.
But yeah, that's the thing, and that's where I think they screwed themselves. But in terms of recapturing, like the Many Saints of Newark tried to do with The Sopranos, I feel like And Just Like That did the better job because it feels like I'm watching Sex and the City. Yeah. And then I just realized, but this was never destination viewing for me.
Yeah.
It was, if nothing else is going on, I'll pull off.
What else has HBO got in the bag that they can go back to now? Now that they've gone back to The Sopranos, they've gone back to Sex and the City.
They brought back Curb Your Enthusiasm, and not that Curb Your Enthusiasm ever died. Like, it ended with the 5th season. The very end of the 5th season felt like a finale, and then it was whenever Larry David kind of felt like, I want to do more of this. But then we had season 10 and season 11 these past 2 years. Yeah. Like, it went back to feeling more like when it was in its heyday, and there's going to be new Curb Your Enthusiasm every month. I mean, every year.
I feel like they've hit the fast forward button on this little revisiting project with already having a sequel to Game of Thrones coming out in a couple of months.
Yeah, there's that
House of Dragons.
10-Year-Old Tom, which is basically the 4th season of The Life and Times of Tim.
Is it? Oh, yeah. I gotta watch it.
Oh my god, 10-Year-Old Tom is fantastic. Okay. Life and Times of Tim is fantastic.
Yes. Which they finally put up on
HBO.
HBO.
Well, as soon as they put up 10-Year-Old Tom, they put up The Life and Times of Tim, and I'm just like, I'm so excited. And then you watch Tom. Tom is basically just Tim, but as a 10-year-old, and it is it is excellent.
Oh no!
But there's another like fast forwardy reboot sort of thing from HBO. I don't know. I think Bored to Death would be fine. I mean, Ted Danson, Mr. Mayor is out there. He's still doing it. But also Ted Danson showed up in Curb Your Enthusiasm this past season. So he still has that connection to HBO. And it would be, I'd be okay to see more Bored to Death where Jason Schwartzman, Zach Galifianakis, and Ted Danson wound up after the way that the third season ended. I can't think of really any other shows, though. They're like, Arliss. It is time for the Arliss remake.
Actually, honestly, one of the ones I'm surprised we haven't heard anything about is Girls.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to hear from Girls, though. I got to be completely honest with you.
Yeah.
When all the stuff came out that Lena Dunham and the fact that she basically sexually assaulted her sister.
Yeah.
And she didn't shy away from that. Like, and that's like, I guess it's one thing to own it, but it's also, I'm not really going to get back into bed with you.
Yeah.
In a creative sense.
Right.
When we're in a world that, you do the slightest thing and you can be completely screwed over and your career is done. If you're the wrong person too. Cause I mean, we've seen a little bit of the double-sided nature of that with the whole Whoopi Goldberg kerfuffle that happened this past week.
I mean, she's always got a kerfuffle. That's the thing about Whoopi, is for the last like 10 years, she's every year had a kerfuffle. Longer than that, even. When did her and Ted Danson, speaking of Ted Danson, show up to like the Emmys in like white and blackface? Like,
and that's what people were referencing is like because Ted Danson spoke on it, and he's like, I don't know if he's any better, and it was the blackface picture, and it's yeah. I mean, exactly. That's the thing. She's always sort of been that, but this latest one does not feel the same as the other Whoopi Goldberg kerfuffles.
What happened this time, I guess?
She said that the Holocaust wasn't about race.
There's so much that is directly tied to that. That's such a weird...
Yeah, like it's not about race. It's about the evils of humanity and the evil that man is capable of doing to other people. She highly doubled down on the fact that it was white people oppressing other white people, which is flat out not true.
Yeah, I mean, there was not only were there a number of people of color that were wrapped up in that sort of stuff. On top of that, there's a difference. Oh my God, this is such a weird.
Especially when you look at.
I mean, it seems like it's a pretty straightforward. Like, nope, that's just wrong, Whoopi. And
then she went on Stephen Colbert and doubled down on it in what was meant to be an apology for her original remarks from Monday. Okay. Like, so she said it on The View on Monday, went on Colbert Monday night. Tuesday morning, she's still in the news because with Stephen Colbert, in trying to explain what she meant, that was where it was white people doing it to other white people. And then the only reason I'm aware of this is I had on CBS Sunday Morning because there was a delay in going to work on Tuesday because of the weather. No, not that. I was working from home because I was waiting for my chair to come. Chair Watch 2022. The chair is here, and we're going to talk about it later on in the episode. But I had worked from home because there were packages coming that required signatures, and I got the okay to work from home. So I had CBS this morning on the background. And when they started talking about what was going on with Whoopi Goldberg, like everything she said, I'm like, well, that's just somebody who's not educated. And then when she went to apologize and said the same thing, I'm like, I don't know. Like at this point, like we should just stop giving her the attention for this, right? It doesn't come from it. But then it felt like sleep paralysis, that like where I'm awake but I can't move sort of feeling.
Yeah.
As the anchors of CBS this morning sort of found a way to defend what she said. Now, first of all, Tony DeCopel, who's like now the only white person who's one of the anchors because it's Gayle King and I don't know. He's a football guy, Nate Burson or Burton. He's great. I love Nate. And it's great to see him on there. I love Gayle King too. But Tony DeCopel, he kind of feels like he's there to be the voice of ignorant white America. uh, like, and you know, whatever, come from me, Tony DiCaprio. You're clearly more successful than me. I'm sitting in my basement doing a podcast remotely, which HBO Max says you shouldn't be doing. But it's just one of those situations where Tony DiCaprio, he's done a lot of stuff, like looking back at the town he grew up in New Jersey, and suddenly finding out how racist that town was, and how like it affected him. Because like they did like redlining and pricing people out, and all the ways that the suburbs kept, you know, minorities from coming in the 50s and 60s. And he spoke to the mayor, and the mayor basically looked like he was a cast member from The Sopranos. And the way he talks is like, and if someone disagrees with you, you took care of it. And it's just like, Tony DiCaprio, it feels like you're trying to make yourself better, but at the same time, a lot of the time you're doubling down on it. And even he, in the whole like defense of it, was like, well, it really wasn't about race. And I'm like, but it was. And then Gail references Mein Kampf, and I'm like, in Mein Kampf, there are whole sections that talk about the inferiority of minorities and how the people that he vilified, the Jewish people, used them to further their agenda. Like, don't reference the book, but only pick the ones that kind of support what Whoopi Goldberg just said. Because guess what? There are other pages.
Wow.
Like it
I didn't heard anything about this.
Oh, well, congratulations. I'm so proud of you for not hearing anything about it, because it is
getting onto the wrong side of the conversation whenever Nazis are involved is usually that's a hard one to bounce back
from. Thank you for that. Thank you for showing a modicum of intelligence in this thing that, like, I don't know how it kept going and just going. Like, at what point was somebody going to stand up and say, we just need to stop giving her airtime and stop referring to it? And I know that right now I'm guilty of it too, but it's still in the news. Like, it was still in the news this morning. So I'm highlighting that just don't look philosophy of it. Stop giving her attention for it. And it's in the news mostly, talking about the reason why is that double-sided nature of it is she got a 2-week suspension from The View. Like, just take 2 weeks, you apologize, you're done. You're not going to be on The View for 2 weeks. And Whoopi Goldberg is upset that she got a slap on the wrist. And it's like, I didn't do anything wrong. And it's like, people who did less than what you did have been fired from their jobs. And it's because you're Whoopi Goldberg that you get a suspension. And everybody rushing to your defense, even though to say the Holocaust wasn't about race, like, even if you're looking at it from an outsider and you're like, oh, there's 2 white people, Hitler's whole thing was that the Jewish people, the peoples of Israel, were an inferior race.
Yeah,
that was his rhetoric.
There's better people than us to educate anyone out there on the reasons of the Holocaust, but like, let's make one thing very clear. The Nazis were very much racist assholes. If anything else, they were also that. I don't know. That's such a weird, it's a weird hill to die on, and it's a weird conversation to, like, more than anything, it's weird because it's you didn't have to talk about that. You know what I mean? Like nobody out there was asking you to. It's such a.
I don't get when you go on Colbert to apologize. It should be the apology, and then you talk about other stuff. Your segment on Colbert should not be more about it. There's nothing significant about this year, 2022, in terms of World War II, right? Like, we're not at some big anniversary where it's on everybody's tongue. The only thing that I can think of is it has to go to the Uyghurs and what's going on in China with the genocide, and everybody that's talking about, should we really be going to the Olympics in a place where, like, there's a genocide happening?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's the only way that it's, like, talking about the Holocaust seems truly relevant. And it's not like it's one of the things that we should never talk about the Holocaust. We should definitely educate ourselves to make sure that something like that never happens again.
Yeah, but do they need to be talking about it
on The
first
View?
Thing in the morning on The View? I don't know, right?
I don't know. It's been a weird week for stories like that. And
Well, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
mostly because of, as you pointed out, with everybody being in China right now, and then on top of that, you have half of the Olympic sports right now are being played by people that are represented by the Olympic Committee because for one reason or another, their country isn't there. Whether it's because they want to protest Russia and China, whether it's because they are Russia and they got sanctioned, or like there's it's a weird Olympics, man, and it has made for some weird world politics this week.
yeah. And that's it. So the Winter Olympics are going on. I have watched exactly 1 second. I turned on the TV and a man was getting into a luge and I changed the channel. And I used to love the luge. It's faster bobsledding.
Yeah.
The only thing better than the luge is the skeleton, because that guy could break his neck.
Well, the Winter Olympics always brings out a ton of Salt Lake residents. Like there's a lot of people in like Olympians at the games right now that are from the area. Part of that is because we've just still got a bunch of training facilities from when Salt Lake was the host of the Olympics.
Yep.
So a lot of people will literally move here in order to train. So we kind of end up a little skewed in that way. But the big one this year is the figure skater Nathan Chen is the one that got to the Olympics. I believe it was 4 years ago, if not 8. One of those two in the past, and kind of whiffed it, and like really poorly whiffed it. So it's kind of his big comeback story, because the thing is the kid is a phenomenal skater. It was just like the one place in the world you never want to whiff it was the Olympics, and of course that's where it happened. So it was that kind of story. So this year everybody was really excited to see how he did, and he did really well. So we've been doing a lot of figure skating stuff, a lot of doubles and singles on that. Curling as well. Watched an amazing match between Norway and Italy the other day, where like if I could understand quite what was going on in the game, because I don't fully understand curling, but it looked like Norway had a pretty decent lead in the beginning and then completely screwed themselves on that one too. But Italy came back on that, so that was a pretty wild game to watch. Watch some of the downhill skiing stuff, because that's always a blast, just to watch people just going like 100 miles per hour, basically like falling face first into the snow.
I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. You heard how I felt about the Summer Olympics. I feel that way about the Winter Olympics too. It's so hard to have that. I mean, sports right now is hard in general, because like we're learning a lot about how sports are handled and the people who are in control, and how they're not the greatest people in the world.
And how maybe it's kind of always been that way, and we've always kind of known it, and have always kind of just tried to ignore that part of it.
Exactly.
So we're all kind of complicit in this, yeah.
Yeah. And we all just kind of want to go back to being ostriches about it, but it's really difficult because of how high our heads have gone and how far they have to travel back to get under the dirt.
Yeah.
That metaphor worked, right? I think it worked.
Yeah, man, for sure. I mean, both between the people that are in charge and the athletes themselves, and it's been, part of it is because I feel like it's all a kind of a symptom of everything that's gone on with COVID in general, kind of being very revealing as a crisis in that human nature has really kind of reared its ugly head in a lot of ways with COVID, and so this is a huge part of it, right? Is because a lot of the stuff that you are talking about in terms of like personalities, a lot of it has revolved around the ways in which they've handled things like that, but also handled things like what's going on in China right now with them locking people up in camps and stuff, and in Russia with the idea that there's a good chance that we're going to see a false flag operation anytime in the next like few months, and we'll all know it's a false flag, but we won't know. But I don't think that means that we're all going to agree on what to do about that. All sorts of crazy crap that is going on right now, and I think it's all just been highly highlighted. I mean, by the last 2 or 3 years of us all being on high alert.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, it comes down to the fact that we didn't have anything else to do, right?
Right.
So we started looking into the things that we had left, like sports and things like that, and we realized, oh wow, underneath the surface, there's a lot of dry rot.
Yeah, I also think a lot of people just kind of got sick of doing things the way that we've always done them, just because we've always done them that way. And what happened was we had something that came along that disrupted the way we always do things. And I think a lot of people suddenly realized that like it's actually really easy to shake up your routine and do something else. So like that sports team that you follow but don't, Like you've just, mom and dad always have football on whenever you go over the house. So of course you root for the Patriots because that's just what you do. You couldn't say fuck all about any of the members though.
Right.
And now you haven't seen them in 2 years. So do you really still care about the Patriots even though you haven't seen them in 2 years? No, not really, right? Like, and it kind of becomes that thing where it's just like, your priorities have definitely shifted. And for a lot of people, one of their major priorities used to be things like sports teams or like, television shows or movies that have completely now shifted their focus because they haven't been able to do those things in the last few years. And it's going to be really interesting to see kind of the fallout in terms of that sort of stuff. Because, like, I think there's going to be some sports events that are not really going to recover from this whole, like, hey, nobody's been coming to the games for 2 years because they haven't been allowed in the building. And some people are going to bounce back in droves. Some places are going to get millions more people than they ever did before.
Oof. Had not considered it that deeply, but you're right. You're 100% right, and that's I don't know how to feel about it. It's all weird. Also, not to defend the Patriots, but they kind of lost Tom Brady, and what reason was there to care about them once he was gone, right? In those 2 years, did you care about the Buccaneers at all?
No.
Okay, yeah. So
but that's the other side of it is of that particular thing is I was just using him as an example, but like you're not wrong.
It sounded very
right?
close to home for your own situation.
No, but then the other side of that is also like without the Patriots, did I care about Tom Brady for 2 years? No. So like not in either direction. It just kind of became this like, and and like I said, that was just an example. Like this is true just across the board. There are some teams, and just like in the music industry, there's going to be some bands that just never recover because they're never going to be able to get back on tour again because it's hard to like get yourself going and get yourself up and moving and get on tour, and to lose that over 2 years and not have that momentum going it's gonna hit a lot of people hard. Yeah. Like I said, it's not gonna be like across the board. Like I don't think like the NFL is done for. Like I don't think it's anything like that. But I think you're gonna hear about how there's gonna be some facilities, some teams, some changes that are just trying to keep up and have not been able to recover, won't be able to recover from this.
Yeah, especially those teams that, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the NFL right now. And I'd like to close out this talk about the NFL by announcing the Washington football team is now the Washington Commanders. And suddenly I don't give a shit anymore. You went from having kind of the best football team name ever, like just admitting we're a football team and we're from Washington, to the Commanders.
Commanders is a weird one because you don't really often hear that pluralized. Why didn't they just go like whole hog into the whole like patriotism thing and do commandos?
Because that means not wearing underwear. The Washington Commandos. Like I'm thinking Commandos, that it's
you work with Hasbro to get G.I. Joe as like your mascot. Like that would be, you could go far with the Washington Commando, much further than you can with the Commanders.
Yeah, the Commanders, they're the Commanders-in-Chief. Their logo is awful. Like, it just feels like you gave yourselves 2 years with the Washington football team thing, and you didn't use that 2 years to come up with anything better.
I have to highlight the fact again that Commanders is such a weird word to hear because you don't often hear the concept of commander pluralized, and it's a team sport, so it was always going to be pluralized. Why was this the word that you settled on?
I had never even considered that thing. There's one commander. There's a single commander.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the commanders-in-chief. It is the commander-in-chief.
I hadn't even thought about that. My favorite part about the Washington Commanders is the DC helicopter. Like, it was like a sports copter that was covering the reveal's going to be tomorrow, who got a shot inside one of the offices and totally ruined the reveal of the name. Like 12 hours before it was supposed to happen, because they just got a clear view into an office with Washington Commanders written. Like, that's just good to know that humanity is still working the way it used to, which is adequately.
Oh, man.
All of this is to sort of lead into, I watched Fight Club yesterday for literally the first time in my life. I had avoided it for 13 years. Avoided is the wrong term. I wasn't interested for not 13, sorry, 23 years. Right? Yeah, 23 years.
I believe it was
Fight
a
Club
99
has been
film,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, 99. So, yeah. Saw that movie for the first time. And, so spoilers for Fight Club, a 23-year-old movie, is
Yeah.
how I'm going to start this section out.
Yeah.
Fuck that movie and its Hollywood bullshit cop-out ending.
So what do you mean by that? What is the...
I mean, Edward Norton should be fucking dead. You put a gun in your mouth and you pull the trigger, you die. Not your imaginary dissociative identity. I don't understand how he's alive, and it really bothers me. Like, it really bothers me, because the whole movie was pretty much leading up to the only way to stop myself is to stop myself.
So there is also, I mean, there's been discussion, and to this day, it's an unsettled ending. Like you're kind of getting to a lot of the conversation that's been around it. It's like the top at the end of Inception. Like there are people out there that do believe that he is dead. There are people out there that believe the building that he's in explodes at the end of that movie. There are people out there that don't believe he's dead, and they talk about all sorts of weird reasons why they think he survived. According to the lore of the book itself, he survives.
Yeah, because there's
with
a second book.
complications.
There's Fight Club 2.
Well, 2 and 3 at this point.
There's a 3?
Yeah,
I'm never
2
going to
and-
read these books. But...
Well, 2 and 3 are not books though; they're graphic novels.
Okay.
He is in the Chuck. I say he. So Chuck Palahniuk is on like the board for those comics and like definitely considers them canon and has helped with story. I don't know if he's done like a full like I'm the only author of these things for them though, because I first of all that's not how it usually works in comics. But it might be because they were indie developed, I think. So that's about as much as I know about 2 and 3. Other than there's a lot of stuff about like about mental health and the way that it's passed on, and there's a lot of Jesus imagery, which is really really leans into what the books leaned into more than or the original book leaned into. So I mean like the ending of that movie is definitely insane, right? And there's a conversation to be had. I want to make sure that we're not talking about it as definitively as you seem to be, because it's not defined by my understanding. And again, this is a conversation that people I have had in lunchrooms of high schools for years, is whether or not they're all dead at the end or not.
I don't based on what is shown on the screen, Tyler, the narrator, Sebastian, if we want to use his name from the sequel novels, Jack, if we want to use how Ed Norton referred to the character, he's alive and with Marla, and all the other buildings blow up. I mean, based on things that are said in the text, their whole plan was to go to this one building to watch the other buildings blow up.
Yeah,
it's why the other members of Project Mayhem show up.
So in the original book, there's kind of a turnabout on that, and their building is the only one that blows up. That's the other thing, is that the movie ending has a different ending than the book itself. But then, as I said, it's kind of readopted and retconned with the sequel series and in the comics and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of like weird additions of this one as well too. But I think the other side to think about all of this is, at the end of the day, like it is such a bizarre, absurd story, and it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that somebody gets shot in the head and lives. That happens a lot. So like, okay, so I don't know.
It's fine. It does happen. It does happen. It's very rare that somebody swallows a gun and pulls the trigger and survives it.
I guess for anybody that's never read Palahniuk, he's a lot like Ellis and a lot like Matt Millar and like these kinds of really graphic writers that are like weird shit like that, like somebody getting I think of like Assface from Preacher, right? Yep. Like somebody getting shot in the face with a shotgun point blank and surviving, but not without any consequences. There are horrible consequences for that character, right? So that is not too unusual for Palahniuk writ large, just across the board. He has entire books about that exact kind of stuff. Is I'm the rare bastard that survived the shot to the head, and now my life is miserable. And here's 300 pages on why my life is fucking miserable because I'm the rare bastard that survived the shot in the head. Like that is. That could possibly be like that might be the plot outline of like his next book, or like that's just kind of the way that kind of world works. So as much as that ending is I'm pretty sure different from what happens in the book, and as much as it is definitely super fucked up and like near impossible, for me that just kind of goes part and parcel with everything else in that movie. I mean, it's also near impossible that you could have a organization of men that goes so fucking deep that he literally has nowhere to run. Right, like that kind of whole aspect of it is also pretty phenomenally over the top. I don't know.
I mean, but it exists within the lore of the world. Like, it makes sense with what the film presents, I guess. So now that we're talking about it, right, I guess he could have turned the gun and essentially shot through his cheek, which I guess is what happens, right? Like, he shoots the gun in his mouth, but he doesn't aim for any of the vital stuff. He just kind of aims for the soft tissue of the cheek area, which is why like there's blood there. But why would that kill the Tyler Durden identity in the way that it blows out the back of the head? Like, why would that physical thing attack a mental thing in that way? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And it really feels sort of sellout-y for this whole movie that is about, like, live fast, die hard, change the world around you.
I mean, but that's not what you're supposed to... Okay.
All right, well, that's fine. No, that's what I want to talk about it. That's what I want to talk about. So
the live fast, die hard mentality is supposed to be proven to be an unsustainable life.
Right.
Like, you're not supposed to feel that way at the end of that movie.
But then
what you're supposed to feel is at the end of that movie is that every man does need to take charge at some point. And I do mean man specifically, because this movie is super male focused. There's no that's not up for debate. But this idea being that every man has to take charge of his own life at some point, but that starts with taking charge of one's own self. And a lot of what this movie is leading towards is the fact that men will blame a lot of outside factors. Like, it's the like secret underlying message is a lot of guys will walk away from this movie thinking that it supports their idea that the rest of the world is making them miserable. But what this movie is actually saying is, no, you're making yourself fucking miserable. And so, like, that moment is just him taking charge of the self for the first time ever and killing that part of himself that no longer, that he can't need. It's toxic. So he literally kills, like, the toxic masculinity within himself by the end of that movie. It's just a metaphor. Like, the entire thing is just a metaphor.
But he shoots himself for real.
Yes. He shoots himself for real, but as you pointed out, not in the ways in which we see Tyler get shot, right? So you're just asking, like, why? Like, it doesn't make sense, and why does this happen when that happens? And the problem is that it's never going to make sense in any logical sense because it's not. It doesn't exist within a logical world. Like Tyler is not real.
Right. Well,
so
yes.
Right. So, like, this idea being that it's all imagery and metaphor anyway. And like I said, like you. Walking away from that movie and thinking that it's supposed to be about how, like, you're supposed to live fast and die young or whatever. Like, no, like, the whole point is quite the opposite of that, is that you cannot live that way. As much as it can feel that way and the world can make you want to feel that way, it's a self-destructive path that you go down if you go that route. And that's the problem, is that people walk away from that movie and that's not the message that they seem to receive.
Bro, it's not the message that the movie ultimately sends. Because if he ends up dead, if he ends up shooting himself because it's not sustainable the way that he was living, and he realizes that, and then he takes his own life, it really hammers home that this is not the way to live. And I agree that it's not the way to live. The way that they were doing it, like, I'm not trying to defend it. I'm not walking away saying that that's the metaphor. But the problem is, when that's the way that he was living, and then he goes to shoot himself because I cannot sustain this type of life anymore. And rather than die from that gunshot, he not only lives, but gets the girl. It's not hyper surprising that people misinterpreted that message.
Well, because what you're saying is that Jack, for all intents and purposes, the narrator, should have died. But
yes.
But the whole point is that is that if he does die, then it becomes this whole idea that like the world is crushing, you're crushing yourself, there's no hope to get out. I think it's a much better ending that he's able to get out and cure himself and become a better person afterwards, which is supposed to be the intended like idea with Tyler being gone, is that he is going to go on to become a better person. He's going to stop going and pretending to be sick at all of these meetings just so that he can like feel something. He's going to stop living by himself off in the middle of fucking nowhere under an underpass. Like he's going to do these things that are, he's going to make his own life better, and he's not going to be given that opportunity if he's killed. So like it's a story about reform. It's not a story about revenge. Like it's not that he deserves to die because of this terrible things that he did in his life. He deserves the opportunity to get better.
See, and I guess
because like otherwise, as a morality story, you're saying there's no way you're ever going to get better. You might as well kill yourself, which is like again the complete opposite of what the story is trying to say.
Which is not what it's trying to say either. I guess
like there's a whole car crash scene where that becomes kind of what Tyler is saying is the only conclusion. And you realize in that moment that if he keeps going that route, that is the only way it can end. So the only way for him to be better than Tyler is to not do that, is to not kill himself and everyone in that car, but to kill only that part of himself that's no good anymore.
I guess. It felt like it betrayed the rest of the story to me. Like, I was so totally on board for it, even the weird stuff, even the reveal that Brad Pitt is fake and all that other stuff. Like it all made sense, and that wasn't, like, hyper surprising to me. Like, it all kind of, it's all built into the story, and, like, okay, we haven't heard his name up to this point, and then, of course, he's Tyler, and the way that everybody is treating him as he's out in the world. Like, I was able to suss that out based on what was on display in the film, but then that moment where at the end he lives and he gets the girl. Maybe if he didn't get the girl, I don't know. I don't know how to solve it. And the fact of the matter is, I don't really think I need to solve it. No, I think that it was an entertaining 2 hours and 15 minutes of my life. I don't know if I necessarily ever have to watch it again, but it's well acted. I mean, it's an interesting story. You bring up the Jesus imagery in the book, which, again, I've never read the book, and I probably never will read the book, because I've tried to read Palahniuk, and his style is just not for me, and that's just me talking. But there was a big part of me that wondered if it was kind of a movie twin to The Matrix, in this way that I would have never considered if I hadn't just watched The Matrix. And the fact that they both came out in 1999. But, like, to think about, like, that there was that imagery that just didn't make it to the screen, like, I'm not surprised that my mind kind of put the two in a similar, like, file folder in my brain.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was fine and it was enjoyable. But, like, from the beginning, it didn't feel like the real world. Like, it always felt like a story. Right. So it was never going to be one of those situations where I'm going to take away any sort of real world lesson or blame from it. Like, it's very specifically this guy's story. And if there are going to be parallels, that they'll exist, but also take them with that grain of salt.
Yeah, I think in 2022, the idea of a character like the narrator getting a happy ending seems really foreign to us. But I think that, like, it's important to the story that he be allowed to continue and get better. And I think that that's kind of always the case with Palahniuk in his books, is that he always has these people that are at the center of his stories that, like, don't really deserve a second chance, but we live in a world where we want everyone to have a second chance, like here in our world. So he gives people second chances that don't often deserve it. You know, one of my favorite ones by him is Diary, and it's this beautiful story about this woman and her kid who are stuck on an island, kind of like Block Island, and they, like, take care of people's homes for them while they're back on the mainland, but then they come to the island and they stay at their vacation homes. And, like, there's all this weird stuff about how her husband's in a coma, but he used to be the one to take care of the houses, but now she has to while he's in the coma. And now she started to discover that the husband was, like, hiding things in people's homes, and people are, like, freaked out. And then slowly, like, over time, it becomes more and more this, like, Wicker Man-esque story of, like, the people of the island have, like, need her to do specific stuff to the people that are coming to visit. And, like, it's very bizarre and weird. But the big thing is that you're introduced to this character in not a great way. Like, she's completely like doped out. She's just not, she doesn't care about anything. She treats her kid like crap. And then like on top of that, her like she talks crap about her husband who's dying in a hospital bed for, we learn halfway through the book all of this stuff to kind of not justify that stuff, but explain what's going on. And it's really interesting because like by that point of the story, you kind of realize like, okay, there's a happy ending available here for a lot of people, but it means also this terrible person needs to also have a happy ending, and that's and so you just kind of come to terms with the fact that sometimes the shitty people also get good endings, and I think that they kind of have to, because one of the things that especially with something like Fight Club that Palahniuk is trying to do is he's trying to put the reader in that main role, which is why you get somebody that's an unnamed narrator as the start of your story, especially when you're reading the book versus watching the movie. Like, there's this feeling of like, it is me, it is I like, my name is my name. And so this idea that you never hear the name is much more powerful, I think, on the page than it ever is in film.
Yeah, well,
but the ways in which it makes you the main character of the story, like the idea being that you have now cleansed that terrible part of yourself, go forth and be better, is like the whole idea of the ending of that story, no matter what direction it goes in.
That's interesting. That's an interesting thing, that it sort of be cathartic for the viewer, for the reader, that like you've read that I would have never, we're gonna make me read this stupid book, Sejohn, and I'm mad at you about that.
I'm not even saying you have to read the book.
No, but it's an
movie. But like that, but like this is why the movie is built this way. This is why the story goes in this direction. And I'm not saying that this means that you have to like it. I'm just like, there are reasons why this movie is this way. And I mean, like, it's kind of hard to deny that the cultural impact of the story as well. So while it may not have worked for you, and that's unfortunate, there's a generation of people that this movie is never gonna, it has completely affected an entire generation of especially young teen boys, but more than that even.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I came to it too late to feel that thing. I mean, I remember hanging out at a friend's house in 2005, and like fighting was how they had fun. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't realize that it was going to be a Fight Club kind of night.
Yeah.
And then like suddenly I'm in a balls out brawl with this kid who's like half my size, and like I could hurt him if it really came down to it. So I'm like, I'll take a couple of punches, I'll get some in, and like I'll end it when I need to end it. Like, it was just one of those, it's the weirdest situation in my life. And honestly, I think back to it as this thing that, did that really happen? But it really happened. Yeah. And it was like these people who had internalized it, and thinking back to the group of people, it wasn't surprising that they had internalized that part of it, that like they needed to do something to feel quote unquote manly. I don't know.
The thing
like,
is, we were hitting that point in the 90s where our souls were getting crushed, but the world was in really good shape, and so we couldn't deal with that juxtaposition, right? Yeah. Like, we were at that point in American history where we were we were on the top, but we all saw that there were issues. Like, like the stuff that we're dealing with in 2022 is not new, guys. Like, we've known about this stuff for years,
that's
right?
The worst part about watching Fight Club is just seeing, wow, shit hasn't changed in 23 years.
Right. But we have found ourselves in a position where, and the Matrix also captures this. So this is kind of part of what you were saying earlier, is that there was kind of a cultural like movement of like the idea of like killing yourself to live, and that is where like a lot of stuff about like self-inflicted violence becomes a really big deal, and we start to see a real big upswing in people paying attention to suicides. Not that suicides weren't happening before, but we suddenly started talking about it a lot more, and then heavier and heavier and heavier drugs are getting created every day, not just like sold and used, but like straight up people are doing more shit, to like inventing more shit to do to their bodies. There's a lot of stuff tied up in this, and it hits in the late 90s, and then when 2001 happens, it changes everything, and then that particular attitude, it almost kind of gets like a real world grounding, in that like people basically realize like I'm gonna just do whatever the hell I want, because God knows that this world doesn't give a shit about me, and you get this really cynical streak for a decade, right? But this is kind of the precursor to that whole attitude that you do then eventually get later in the 2000s. And it's why this movie doesn't do so hot when it first comes out, because that's the other thing to remember, is that when Fight Club first premiered, it was not a
it was
critical
considered
success.
a failure.
Yeah, but it is in retrospect. It was over the next decade that slowly people started to look back on movies like it and say, like, actually, there was a good point in there about basically how the world is shit and we basically have to just work on ourselves, and so it just kind of it gets picked up over the next 10 years as kind of maybe like an early warning sign of some stuff. It's a really weird like relic that, again, like it's too important to too many people to ever get ignored again. But I do think there is something to be said about the fact that you may have come to it too late for it to kind of have the same effect on you, like, personally.
I mean, yeah, because the effect that it had on me is the people around me who it had an effect on. Like,
Yeah.
as weird as that sounds to say, but, like, I know the people that, like, had read or seen Fight Club. Like, it was pretty easy to identify. And again, that's nothing against you, because clearly you did those two things, but you weren't one of those people who let it sort of lead and guide your life going forward.
Well, the thing I never understood is everybody always left that movie wanting to then start a Fight Club, and I was like, did we learn nothing?
Did we learn nothing from it? Yeah, which is like when it's the thing where, like, yeah, we're gonna fight and we're throwing punches at each other, and I'm just like, I mean, I know how to fight because I took karate and I've been in fights before. Like, this is not new to me, so I don't. This is weird that you guys need to do it, but also I see how you live your lives and I get why you feel this is necessary. And honestly, I could take a couple of punches and then we drink a couple of beers and then I just never hang out with these people again. Like, like, it's a story for me to one day tell on my podcast.
Yeah.
Is what it becomes. And that's not what I'm thinking at the time, but now looking back at it in retrospect, it's like, nothing really happened. It was just it, and that's the other thing. For as weird as, like, you're not supposed to want to start a fight club, that's not the message of that movie. At least I certainly hope it's not the message of that movie. But the fact that it was picked up and a lot of fight clubs actually started in the wake of it makes me wonder, especially since the Don't Talk About Fight Club, Don't Talk About Fight Club is essentially reverse psychology telling you to talk about Fight Club because of the double negative. I don't think it was the goal, but I lost the thread here.
I mean, it's the same issue that always occurs with this stuff. First of all, you take a heavy dose of people that have never actually seen the movie, right? Because you had a lot of kids that were doing this kind of crap, and you can almost guarantee that, like, one teen out of the group had probably seen the movie and was not the right one to interpret it for his friends, and then the rest of them just went off of whatever they thought the movie was, right? So that was a huge part of what was going on. The other side of it was just that there were people out there that just wanted to do these things and they were just looking for a reason to, and the movie like this comes along and it just gives them that. Like, there's a lot of this sort of, like, psychology that we very lightly touch on all the time on this show, where we talk about how people saw a thing, misinterpreted it, or maybe they didn't even see it and just kind of thought this is what this thing was, and it just became this huge part of how everybody kind of sees it and talks about it, to the point where the movie and the book and all that start to become, like, banned and talked about how it's leading to violence. And it's like, did you look at any of it? Did you read any of it? I mean, the fact that, like, here we're sitting in the wake of Texas banning another 16 books somewhere along the line, or was it Missouri? And one of them was extremely loud and incredibly close. And they said, and the listing for it was pornography. And it's like, I don't know what part of that book you read where you got pornography, but it's very often cited as a banned book because of the ways in which it tackles America maybe not handling 9/11 so well. like, and so you've never read this book. You just know a bunch of people that bitch about it because they also probably have never read it. And so you just put it on this list and labeled it pornographic just because you just needed a reason, right? And it's that same idea. It's like, people have never seen Fight Club. People have never gotten into it, but they've got a couple of concepts like telephone game style delivered to them via, like, 3 people, and then suddenly, like, they're like, we need to ban Fight Club because it's going to make kids want to punch each other in the face. I'm like, oh my god. It's such a
if that's what you watch that movie and you take away from it, you wrong. Just
right.
wrong. I mean,
Right.
the things that I took away from it is how quickly something can get away from you. Like you don't own your ideas.
Yeah.
How just because you thought of something doesn't mean that that something you thought up is going to exist in the well-intentioned manner you meant for it. Like, because even though it gets away from the narrator in terms of like him giving into his darker desires, just as him, like, I don't believe the narrator was ever expecting it to become a full-blown terrorist organization.
No, but
Like,
but it is a story about how ideas can be dangerous.
yeah,
Right. And I think it phenomenally explores that kind of idea. My favorite part of that, especially in the movie in particular, is when
his name is Robert Paulson.
yeah, his name is
That
Devon
that
Paulson.
moment right
When
there was
Luke
like the
dies,
moment where
and everybody in the room is like, "Oh, I get it. In death, we're given a name," and it's just like, no,
no,
guys,
that
no."
is the wrong thing to take away from this. This is,
Yeah.
and it's just,
The movie predicts its own audience
Yeah.
misreading. Like that is perhaps one of the reasons that I still love that movie, is because at the end of the day, that movie always kind of knew that it was going to be the bad guy in the room, and it kind of always knew that people were always going to not get it. And so there's that element to it. And for some people, they also saw that in it and they hated it. Like it's often recited as a very pompous film, because it is. And Palahniuk in general is a very pompous writer, because I think he's very well aware of the ways in which he's going to be interpreted. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, because that's it. Because, I mean, first of all, the marketing doesn't do it any favors, because one of the reasons I'm like, I'm not really interested in a movie where guys are fighting each other.
Right.
And that's, like, maybe 20% of that movie is Fight Club scenes.
Dude,
like,
you have no idea. The marketing is so bad that they end up putting out a Fight Club video game that is basically just Street Fighter. And that's just like, that is so far removed from the point of that.
The point of the movie. I mean, it's hilarious. It's satirical. Like, it's really intelligent in terms of movies, which is why I can't sit here and say I'm disappointed that I watched it. But I mean, the real disappointment for me is just that, like, all right, he's gotten to this point where, and you say that he should be without redemption. No, he shouldn't. The narrator is not without redemption. What he needs is help. He needs mental help. Yes. Because he has that dissociative identity disorder that has led to the creation of this full-on toxic, destructive, like, form of himself that is Tyler Durden.
Oh, the movie, I mean, the concept in general, the story is dangerously anti-authoritative. Not that I'm saying, like, that authority is good and we should all worship Big Brother.
Right.
Like, none of that shit. But the idea that he is so against the idea of authority, as the story is so against the idea of any authority figure, that there's no middle ground. There, if he can't be in charge, no one can, is kind of like the final conclusion, and that's not healthy.
That's not
like
healthy.
You're saying,
yeah.
he needs a doctor. He needs to talk to a mental health person of some type in order to start getting help. Of course, right.
And it comes down to, like, and that's beautifully foreshadowed in the film. I can't speak to the book, but maybe it is, where he goes to the doctor and he's like, "Can you just give me something so I can sleep?" And the doctor's response is, "No, you need natural sleep." Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but if this guy were able to sleep, his mind might not have become as fractured to the point where while he was in that insomnia, he was literally in a separate persona, going out and doing things.
Yeah,
like
no. This story hates the idea that there could be anybody that could have any more intelligence than you, the narrator. Yeah. Like it definitely has that gross element to it for sure.
I don't know. I'm like, again, I'm definitely happy that I finally saw it, mostly because I had always interpreted it as one thing, and it is clearly not that thing. But it felt like sort of a tacked on happy Hollywood ending in the finale part
you're
of it.
not, and like, you're not the only person to call that out. Like I said, I'm pretty sure the book ends differently from what I remember from reading it at this point 20 years ago. But then also, you just hear about different people and different versions, and Palahniuk himself has put out various different endings to different stories of his own over the years. When Facebook first got really big, he was one of the first people to start utilizing it to start just putting like a bunch of like work up, which is cool, but it also like muddied the waters for a lot of interpretations of his stories when he was just like, here's an early draft of the story in which Tyler ends up being a woman or something. It's just like all sorts of weird stuff like that.
Well, I mean, that's the really crazy thing is Palahniuk himself. I found an interview where he talked about while writing the book for the first 2/3 of the book, Tyler and the narrator were two separate characters.
Yeah.
And then he realized, oh, but they're always together. They're kind of the same type of person. Why? Maybe they are the same person, which is a really interesting glimpse into the creative drive behind something. But also, when you know that that's how the creator, like, put together the narrative, where, like, they were clearly two different people in the beginning, and then it dawned on me that they were the same character, it can really throw off your read of some of those earlier interactions when at that time they were created as two separate people. And then you just sort of need to rationalize it in your mind that no, they were the same person. I know that doesn't really make sense based on how that scene played out, but trust me, they were the same person the whole time. It's I don't know. It's interesting. It's an interesting thing that I take away from it.
Well, and you also have to remember about the movie is there's a whole added layer here of not just Palahniuk but also Lynch, right? Because David Lynch is as a creative, like there's a lot of weird Lynchian tactics going on in that, like cutting in the porn scenes into his own movie and stuff like that, and like seeing little glimpses of that sort of shit. And there's a lot of really crazy important stuff in the film, and that is, I'm glad you saw it too, because there's probably been stuff over the last 20 years that like we have talked about and I didn't realize you just weren't like clicking with.
Sorry. And you know, whatever, life happens in that way, and it's not one way or the other. I mean, I think the weirdest thing that I took away from it is Ted Lasso season 2. There is a phenomenal episode called Beard After Dark. It's either the 8th or 9th episode of the series. I believe it's the 9th, where it's Coach Beard, only Coach Beard, and he has this moment where they call in a fake fire at a hostess's flat so they can get into a bar. Spoilers for Ted Lasso, I guess, but it's not that. And then afterwards, he basically gives Tyler Durden's whole speech about tomorrow will be the best day of her life. And then, like, watching it, I'm like, oh my God, I didn't realize how much of Fight Club had touched other culture.
Yeah.
Like I didn't realize it because I had just never seen it. Clearly it was there, and I was aware of like those moments, and like that feels like something, but then to see this and, you know, and, how's that working out for you being clever? Like something somewhere used that in a commercial, and I don't know where, but like that is burned into my brain. That how's that working out for you being clever? Because that happened and I just said it. And I'm like, I've never seen this movie before. How did I know that was what was about to happen?
Yeah, it's definitely a movie that pervaded some hearts and minds over the years for sure. So yeah, like I said, I can only imagine the number of conversations and thoughts and ideas that I've probably thrown at you that you didn't just didn't click.
Well, it's interesting to do it. I think the scariest part about Fight Club, and then we'll wrap it up and we'll move to something else, is that whole speech about they're the lost generation because they never had a war, they never had a recession. Mm-hmm. And if, you know, tinfoil caps on, whatever, we're not really a conspiracy theory podcast, but it really says something that 2 years after the movie comes out and this idea becomes more mainstream, that like we need somewhere to focus our attentions, or whatever, 9/11 happens. And not that I support any of those theories that it was an inside job or anything like that, but if it were, you could see.
But after that sentence,
well,
but,
yeah, I'm just.
I get it.
It's understanding how people could derive it, right? Because something that touched culture the way that Fight Club did, and undeniably it had an effect on the culture going forward. You could see some people saying, "Well, maybe that's the reason why these people don't have drive, and people are doing this is because they never had a great war." And so let's do that, right? And it's the Republicans who are in office, and they're evil. I mean, Dick Cheney, evil, proven to be evil based on shit that his company did. And just like, don't go hunting with Dick Cheney or you're going to get shot in the face.
Yeah.
Like, it's
straight
just
up having Karl Rove wandering around in a robe in the background for everything. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one of those situations. And thank you for that reference. I love that reference. But then also, and then you look at the recessions and just like, because he says the whole thing, and I'm like, well, that's not our generation. Our generation had that war that weirdly defined everything that was going on. We've lived through 2 recessions, right? Like, so it makes me wonder if if there were a finger that tipped the scales, right, to move forward our society, if that speech from Palahniuk in the book and then in this movie had some sort of effect on how they controlled our society.
Yeah, at the very least, it explains why someone nowadays defines themselves by things like a political side, right?
Yeah.
Is because that is exactly what Tyler is referring to in that moment, is that idea being that like man needs something like that to define himself, to discover who he really is in those moments. And for good or for ill, I don't think that I don't think that he's wrong, because we do use those moments to define ourselves. The problem is that those moments come with a lot of baggage on top of, and sometimes the things we define ourselves as turn out to be utter assholes. There's consequences to that. It's a deep hard conversation, and it's why I get really kind of I get really kind of on my high horse about like everybody should see this movie, because like I think that even in the end, if you don't enjoy it, it is definitely something worth talking about afterwards, because it happened, and it happened to us, not just around us. That movie happened to us.
Yeah, and all you need to remember is when you're in a weird above a garaged apartment getting punched by a kid, like, I didn't know this is where my night was gonna go, and like, this is fun for him. Like, I'm not mad. I'm not going to hurt him. But, like, buddy, you've not fought if you haven't fought in full hockey gear, right? You haven't tackled members of the football team for mocking you. I don't know. I think about all the fights I got into as a kid, and, like, it's weird to me to think that that's not part of everybody's experience. And a movie like Fight Club really kind of revealed that to me. Yeah. That like these guys who like had never been in a fight, but they needed it to sort of feel alive. And I'm like, I was getting into fights all the time. And not because of Fight Club, but because of the fact that I didn't know when to shut up. Or I wasn't willing to shut up in the face of a bully.
Yeah, it's important to remember that while the movie focuses on the idea that violence and masculinity are inextricably like interlinked,
yeah,
like there's also this idea that they're not going about this the right way. So like the lens is a critical one the entire time, but nobody ever seems to focus through that particular lens, which is really weird to me, because it's all I ever have.
It really highlights how marketing can fuck up a way a thing is interpreted.
Yeah.
Because the focus of that movie is not the fighting, as we've already said, and now at this point I'm just repeating myself, but the marketing being so focused on the fighting as part of it, like, of course that's what you're going to think is the main thrust of this movie.
Yeah.
Even though so much of it is not related to those moments.
Yeah.
It pre-supplements an idea into your mind. So then you're going to just watch that film to support that. And don't feel alone in your thought process about everybody should see it. Leonardo DiCaprio once told Martin Scorsese, "It's the Citizen Kane of our generation."
Hey, man, that's awesome.
and it's appropriate because last year I believe we released the Rosebud Report. Yeah. And now it's the Soap Report. Talking about Fight Club. Talking about Fight Club.
So you did Fight Club this weekend.
What'd you do?
Like, if I had to go as far away from that as I possibly could, I might land on the Minish Cap.
I would have gone with the Country Bears, but close.
First of all, if there's a Country Bears video game, I want to play it. Secondly, no, I've been spending my time this week kind of delving into some older Zelda. I don't like. I think we talked about this probably many times in the past about how like every now and then like I'll get an itch and I'll just do like a run of Link to the Past, and it usually happens once or twice. Once every year.
Once
or so.
Twice a day. No, yeah, that's me. I'm sorry.
But part of that is that every time I get a new Zelda game in my hands, I'm always like, this is great, but it's no Link to the Past. And then I find myself eventually going back to Link to the Past. And the same thing happened with Skyward Sword last year when it came out and all that. But this year, I started kind of getting that itch. But I realized that there's like a slew of games that I just kind of missed. in the whole Zelda canon, you know, like whether that was because they were on Game Boy or it was when I didn't have, you know, I didn't have a Wii, so I only played Twilight Princess when I was home on the weekends on Zach's Wii that he had set up at home, right? So like I did play that one, but I played it in such a long parsed out time that like I don't have like a good solid memory of Twilight Princess.
That's probably for the best, though. I feel like doling that game out in small chunks is the best way to enjoy it.
Man,
if you try to sit and just play it, it is exhausting.
Well, one of the things about not playing it every day and not getting like the mechanics in my head and stuff though is that I at some point completely lost the idea that there was a lock-on mechanic because you know you had to play that with the nunchuck on the Wii, right?
Yeah.
And there's that entire fight in the field where you're riding on the back of Epona and like you're taking out something up in the sky. I can't even remember what it is, and it took me like 3 or 4 hours to do it. And I was so pissed because I was like, this is impossible. Nothing's working. I don't understand how you're supposed to aim at this thing, completely forgetting that there was a whole lock on mechanic. And the second that like something happened and I locked on by accident, I was like, wait. And then like was able to finish the fight in like 20 minutes. And it just I that is my biggest memory of Twilight Princess is that like because I was not playing it every day, I somehow completely like would have to reteach myself every time I got it in my hands and just was miserable because of that. You know, in a lot of ways it comes down to the fact that it is what led to me really kind of just hating motion controls and eventually never playing Skyward Sword is when it first came out because I just was like I can't do it again. I can't do the motion control nonsense. It just I have such a bad taste in my mouth from Twilight Princess that way. So it kind of led to me not playing Skyward Sword for what ended up being a decade. And now I really regret that because I really did love Skyward Sword. Like the art and the story are phenomenal. Some of the controls are still a fucking mess, but so much better on the Switch than I could have ever hoped for.
Well, did you play on a controller or did you use the Joy-Cons?
Controller.
Okay.
Nope. Like
I'm just curious.
Pro controller, and so there's definitely some motion stuff that maybe would have made it better, but again, such a bad taste in my mouth about motion controls that if I can avoid them at all costs, I will. So I've been trying to find some other ones that I kind of like missed in the whole lexicon. Like I remember that I think I finished Oracle of Ages, but I don't know if I ever finished Seasons. Like that kind of stuff has happened.
That's impressive. Because if you're going to finish one of those, Seasons is the one that I think most people would finish. Because Ages is a mess. I love both of them, but what?
But I think the big thing about it that killed it for me is I found out that there was, for some reason I had in my head that there was a third game in that series, and finding out that there wasn't was a little kind of disappointing, and it kind of burned me out after, because I had like plowed through one of them and got halfway through the other expecting there to be another game after that, and then finding out there wasn't, I was just like I wasn't sold on finishing it. But like Link's Awakening was that until it came out, and that was pretty rad. I need to get a hold of Link Between Worlds somehow. But the best
way to get Link Between Worlds is to just buy a 3DS buy the game. Yeah. The game is hyper affordable, or it was like 2 years ago. It was like available for $30.
Yeah.
And just like you can get a 2DS probably for $50. Right. And that is $80 well spent. Though there have been a lot of developments in emulating 3DS games to the fact that Link Between Worlds now has a randomizer that I'm almost tempted to try.
Well, so Link Between Worlds also came out late enough in the 3DS world story where like the 3D wasn't like a mechanically important element to the game, right? Like you could still use it and it still looked cool, but it wasn't like what's the one that I'm thinking of?
Kid Icarus? Sorry.
There's like a Mario game, like one of the later Mario games on it or something.
Yeah, Mario 3D Land, the predecessor to Mario 3D World,
where it looks pretty in 3D and everything, but like you literally turn the camera yourself. Like the 3D wasn't necessary for it. Like Nintendo, the 3D on the 3DS is one of the only mechanics I can ever think of that even Nintendo gave up on itself at some point. Like it was like, yeah, this looks good, but half of you own 2DSs anyway, so here's this game that you don't need the 3D to play.
Pokemon X and Y is the best example of that. because it
Yeah.
has no 3D at all.
Yeah, and so that's what I mean is that Link Between Worlds, I'm pretty sure it came along late enough in the 3DS's life that they were like, you can't make 3D an important part of this because too many people can't make it work. It makes them sick, or they own a 2DS, they can't use it. So like basically they were just like, don't make it a huge mechanic. You can have a mechanic in it that uses it, but it can't be detrimental to you winning the game. Um, and you'll see that a lot. So if Link Between Worlds is where I think it is in that timeline, then there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to just get a hold of it as an emulator, right?
Yeah.
like
Oh, and it's
right.
it's good enough on it. Like it's just one of those situations where you need the computer that can run it, and you need to be willing to. Like I'm surprised that Link Between Worlds hasn't been announced as a Switch re-release.
Yeah,
Like that's where my mind is with that game, because none of the stuff that is like touchscreen is necessary.
yeah,
It
yeah,
like it would be fun if you had the touch screen to be able to pause and, you know, touch and move around your inventory, but
right.
honestly, that's all that it is.
Yeah,
The lower touchscreen is either a map or it's your inventory, and that's it.
yeah,
So they could really bring that one over to the Switch, and I think a lot of people are in that same boat as you, who I never played it because it was a handheld game,
hmm,
and it's sort of, I mean, it is the same map as Link to the Past.
isn't it
It's the
supposed to be a direct
same map.
sequel?
It's a direct sequel.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it would be. I would love if they did that. I'd love if they put it together too. If it were like a Link to the Past with that graphics. I don't know. I love that game. I love Link Between Worlds. But we're
yeah.
talking about the Minish Cap.
Well, yeah. So
Not to diminish that.
so yeah, so that's one that I need to figure out how to get my hands on. I've got to see what I'm going to do with the Oracle games. But yeah, I have found myself diving also into the Minish Cap for the first time ever. Like I'd never played this one before, and like it's hitting a lot of the right buttons for me, man. I don't know. I mentioned that I was going to play the Minish Cap once, and you seemed very down on it. But so far I am 3 chapters in. So I've just gotten to the Fortress of Winds. So I've only about 3 or 4 hours into the game. There's not much to the game in general. Like as far as I can tell, it's definitely on the smaller side, a la like a Link's Awakening or something like that. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I've just been having a little bit of a blast with it. What's really cool about it for me is going back to these Zelda games that I've not played before, like Skyward Sword last year and now this one, is seeing how much stuff is in these games that I didn't realize were not new to the series when I saw them later on, you know. So
Mm.
for instance, in Skyward Sword, there's this whole mechanic where you can get the wind vase, and that's how you like clean up a bunch of stuff, and you are able to find secrets, and there's a whole desert level that you needed and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh, this is such a cool little thing that I've never seen in any other Zelda before. Well, lo and behold, I came to Minish Cap, which was years before that one, and it is one of the first items that you receive here, and you use it in a lot of the same ways. And I was just like, okay, all right, it's like I'm down on this, yeah. um but there's this idea of the unique mechanics that are also like make individual games like really hugely important. And like the unique mechanics of Minish Cap have been phenomenal so far. The whole shrinking stuff and going into different areas and solving puzzles in one size so that you can be a different size has really kind of uh really been a really neat, like I didn't think there was going to be much they were going to be able to do with it, but then like now that I've seen it in action a few times, I'm very, very cool. And I think that the length of the game, because as I mentioned earlier, I don't think it's very long. I think I'm already about halfway through and I've only been playing for about 3 hours. um I think is the perfect size for this kind of unique mechanic to really shine. You know, it's like playing Portal, and how a lot of people felt that the first Portal being like a 3 hour game was kind of perfect, because the second one being like a 10 to 12 hour game, you really start to get to kind of your breaking point with like, okay, I've already done this particular mechanic this many times. I don't need to keep doing this for 5 more puzzles. Thanks. Like it's the same thing with this, is that they give you just enough like time, like getting, oh, you get small, and then you can use the wind bottle to blow this thing across the pond so that you can travel from A to C. And it's like, yeah, that's fun for about 5 seconds, and then you're done, and then that section is done, and then you don't do that again for another like 2 hours. Like so that's that, like it's the perfect kind of amount of just like unique mechanics mixed with stuff that I've seen before, mixed with the fact that like it is a top-down Zelda, which is just kind of my favorite type of Zelda. Like it's just hitting a lot of really cool stuff. And I love like the art and the story so far too. It's been really cool. The little people and the ways in which they kind of work them into some old school lore, with like the Zelda timeline and stuff.
I mean, the really weird thing is that how early in the timeline this game is supposed to take place, because it's why the hero of whatever has his definitive green cap is because of his time with the Minish Cap and, Talking Bird guy. So it's interesting how it establishes a bunch of stuff because of that whole thing. And it was this weird time in the Zelda, like, lore where we were very interested in what came before.
Yeah.
And it's so strange. And I think one of the reasons why I'm down on the Minish Cap is because I replayed it a couple of years ago and I enjoyed it enough, but the same problem persisted that I had with, like, when I played it. It was my birthday game in 2005. I went to Best Buy and with my birthday money, I bought a copy of the Minish Cap. And it's a short game. Like, you're not wrong about it being a short game. How far along are you dungeon wise? You said you're in the Temple of the Winds?
Fortress of Winds.
So you have, that's 3 dungeons completed. That's the 4th dungeon.
No, that's the 3rd.
That's the 3rd dungeon.
So I've done the Deepwood Shrine. I've done the Cave of Flames. I'm doing the Fortress of Winds now. So this is the whole thing where you've got to, like, go up the mountain and there's a whole bunch of stuff about how you learn that the Minori, is that how you say there?
Yep.
Yeah, that they could go in. Like, this is one of the cool lore things that I really loved, is that they were responsible for building some of the, like, statues and stuff that can, like, come to life, and they can use the magic of the statues and things. So you literally climb inside one of the Stalfos guys or whatever they are, and like turn them on and off in order to solve puzzles on your way up the mountain. It was really cool.
Yeah. All right, cool. So, I mean, I don't want to, I'll let you finish it, but it just was one of those games where I was expecting, it's a Game Boy Advance game, so I'm expecting more from it, especially after doing the 2 Oracle games, because the Oracle games were things that I had done prior to that whole thing, and those games are huge. The Oracle games are almost too big for what they are. Like, they put so much into them.
I mean, that's what inevitably happened with the 3rd one, is that there was supposed to be 3 altogether, and they ended up having to trash the 3rd one because they were putting so much work into one of Season or Ages, then kind of like had to half-ass the other one together really quick, and then they just didn't have it in them to get the 3rd one out. Right. And so it ended up not completing the trilogy.
And then that 3rd game turns into the Minish Cap because Capcom had been contracted to do 3 games. So it's an interesting thing. So I was hoping that the Minish Cap would be on the scale of the Oracle games.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, it just isn't.
No, it isn't at all. It feels really thin. I will say there's a lot of and I found this a lot with Link's Awakening too, is the main story is very thin, and then there's a lot of added on stuff, but no real benefit to it. I think they really learn their lesson eventually with things like Breath of the Wild, where there is a bunch of side stuff as well, but the side stuff always becomes important, whether it's because it gets you more stuff or because it ends up actually unlocking something in the main story, or there's reasons to do the side stuff in Breath of the Wild, whereas in Minish Cap and what I found in Link's Awakening is, like, I like this world and it's fun to do this kind of stuff, but, like, I don't really feel like I need every dungeon room from the dungeon keeper. I don't feel like I need to go looking for. Also, the game's not really hard. I don't feel like I need to go and get every heart piece because I don't feel like it's a complete necessity for me to survive. Like, you know what I mean?
Link's Awakening is definitely that. Like, I've only gotten the seashell sword, the level 2 sword, like, 1 time, and that was in 100% clear of the game.
Link's Awakening.
Yeah. And it's not because it's not really necessary. You're strong enough with the regular sword.
Exactly. Yeah, I eventually did it because I was liking the game so much, and I just wanted to spend more time in that world. I don't know if Minish Cap is going to get that for me. So the mechanic that is like a prime example of that in the Minish Cap is the Kinstone piece stuff.
Yeah.
Which only just, like, 3 hours into the game, and what I think is about halfway through the game, only just became important to actually advance in the story, because you have to do the Kinstone pieces with these, like, statues in order to open the way to the Wind Fortress. But, like, before this, it was I've forgotten about it. Like I walked up to somebody and they like had like a bubble and I couldn't remember what the bubble mechanic was. I had to go looking for it. And I was like, "Oh right, that's how you know they have a kinstone piece and then you can share it with them." And then they're always like, "Yeah, maybe this will do something important in the world." And then it makes a chest in an area that I'm nowhere near and I'm like, "I'm not going all the way out to the
And
fucking
that
forest
chest
for
will
that."
only have rupees in it.
Or more kinstone pieces.
Yeah, it's like it's one of those situations because also the kinstones were the solution to the Pokemon problem because we wanted people to use their link cables for things. So kinstones could be traded. So you might have a guy who needs like a green triangle kinstone from you, and you'll never find that in the game. And the hope is that, oh, I have one of those. I'll trade you for your blocky blue one because I need one of those and I haven't found one.
Yeah.
There is a chance that you are never going to find the kinstone piece that somebody needs in your game.
Well, and considering how many of them you stumble across, like you go and you solve these huge puzzles and you feel really good because you finally made your way up the mountain to this thing and you get there and you're like, oh, I think that there's a wall here that I can bomb. And sure enough, you were right. And then you walk inside and you kill a bunch of dudes and there's a chest and then you open it up and it's a stupid freaking kinstone. And you're just like, I don't really need this. I was really hoping it was going to be either a heart piece or some rupees because I need to buy the goddamn boomerang and somehow don't have enough money yet.
Yeah. And that's my other critique, the thinness of the game, and I'll let you finish it before we go discussing that further. But then also this added thing, like it had gone to a point of fatigue where every game had a trading element to it. Yeah. And it's just unfortunate. And I think also the other problem with the Minish Cap is we had the Link to the Past remake on the GBA like 2 to 3 years prior, and that game felt so much bigger. Like it's such a good remake, and they added a bunch of stuff too. That's completely optional.
Sword stuff, didn't they?
Yeah. Which is why the Four Swords is you're in the weird Four Swords part of the lore in the game. Because do you have the Four Sword yet?
No, not quite. I've got it's got the flames and the dark crystal wooden or whatever it is in it, and so I've got the white sword currently, but after a couple of these I think I should have the weird, I can like do the whole like duplicating thing now, if that's what you mean.
That's what I mean. Because I think it starts with 2, and that's how you figure out what dungeon you have to be in, is how many links you need to open certain areas.
Right.
Like it's a weird gatekeeping thing, and it's fine, but it's sort of the Four Sword area of the Zelda lore that you're a part of, and that stuff never really worked for me because it felt more about the gimmick in getting me to buy 4 Game Boy Advances than the actual experience of Zelda. And it's really disappointing because it should be my bread and butter. It's the 2D stuff that's so similar to Link to the Past that I was so yearning for, but the marketing took precedence over that and ultimately delivered a kind of lackluster experience.
I think for a game that, I mean, let's be honest, I didn't spend any money on, and is kind of what I was looking for to just be something to just like fill my time and hit Zelda notes for me. Like it's kind of doing it perfectly though. So like I can totally get like in context, like spending your birthday money on this thing, and it was a lot of money at the time, and it was supposed to be the next big thing. It would definitely be disappointing in a lot of ways. But I think coming to it as if basically a glorified phone game for me, like it's pretty much hitting exactly what I needed it to do.
And that makes sense. And and I guess
because I'm trying to get into some other stuff on like the Switch. I tried to get into Eastward, and there's a lot of potential there, but I don't have the immediate connection to that world that I do to a Zelda world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that Beetle shows up in this game, like already, I'm like, I cleared off Beetle's space. I vacuumed up Beetle's rug so that he can come and sell stuff. Or I just met the Goron in the woods that I'm going to go help because I got to go find a stupid kinstone for him. Hopefully I can find it. But yeah, there's this idea being that like there's like an immediate kind of tie to this world that also really benefits it. Because it's not that I don't think I'll ever get into like a game like Eastward on the Switch, but I need time with that game, and I don't necessarily always have that time right now.
I understand. Since we're talking about the Switch, I'm going to shift gears to talk about Pokemon Legends Arceus.
Yeah.
Which I rolled credits on last night, and I'm very happy Though, I guess that little remnant of video game Twitter on my feed tells me that there's a super secret post-game boss, so I'm not necessarily done with it, though I am. I'm done with Arceus for right now. I'm going to take a break, because it got to the point where it was invading my dreams.
Yeah.
What am I going to do next? Where do I got to do? How am I going to accomplish this thing? Which, that's good when a game is able to do that, but I also hate it. I also hate when a game does that with almost all of my feelings.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's good. It's good that you got into it. So, how does this stack up as, a Pokemon game? Because is this, does this feel like Breath of the Wild in that it's, the next evolution of what Pokemon will be going forward? Or does this feel like one of their weird offshoots? Because Pokemon famously will try anything for, a side game, and if it doesn't work, just completely dump it and go back to the old system. They've done that 1,000 times.
I hope that there are more games like this. I hope that going forward, Arceus is the template.
Okay.
It's a weird one. It's definitely everything you just talked about. It's an experiment game. It is very much meant to be, let's try this thing out. They tied it to the worlds of Diamond and Pearl with the fact that you're in the past from that. Okay. And maybe literally in the past from it. I don't know yet. But you fell through a rift in space-time, your character, so maybe you're from the Sinnoh region of the future. Potential spoilers, but that's pretty much, they say, oh, you came from Great Sinnoh, and I'm like, oh, they think that it's a thing, but it's a place. Mm-hmm. That makes sense, and it's a cool way to see how lore and belief would have been infected if there was a great space-time rift in the sky. And information is going back and forth between them, which is sort of a big thing in Diamond and Pearl, in the fact that the Diamond creature is the monster that controls time, and the Pearl creature is the monster that controls space. So, it all makes sense, right? The whole sliders, time travel nature of it makes sense. But very clearly, you have a cell phone. Your character has a cell phone, and people are like, oh, that's interesting. And I'm like, yeah, it is, right? You guys don't have these. This is very much kind of feudal Japan, based on the architecture and the clothing and the way that you guys are approaching everything. So I'm very much in the past with a piece of future technology.
Yeah.
So that's the whole thing of it. But the actually going out and hunting for Pokemon is so satisfying. In a way that if that is not what the next Pokemon game does, they'll be missing an opportunity. Yeah. The fighting Pokemon thing. So the big thing is you get to the world, and just as you arrive, lightning has struck from the great rift in the sky, and exist 10 noble Pokemon, which the great hero, those were the Pokemon that he fought alongside. They were of that species. So the bloodline keeps them going. And it represents 10 of the 16 type matchups of Pokemon. Okay. These nobles. And so each section, you go to a section of the map. And in that section, there's the noble beast that is not frenzied by the lightning. And that one you have to earn its trust so that you can basically use it as a vehicle to traverse the area. And then once you get that ability to travel with that Pokemon, you're able to get to a fight against the Pokemon that is frenzied.
Okay.
And how those work is there's a warden assigned to every noble beast, and that warden gives you balms, which are bags of the Pokemon's favorite food.
Okay.
And you throw the bombs at the Pokemon to the point that it's weak enough that you can throw out a Pokemon and fight it.
Okay.
And then once you've calmed it down enough by throwing food at it, it's no longer frenzied. So that's the two types of things. You have the one noble beast that's prove to me you're worthy, child. Because you're 15, that's the other difference. You're not a 10-year-old, you're a 15-year-old in this game, which okay, thanks Pokemon for aging me up 5 years. But so you do that and then you fight them, and that's pretty much the whole game. It's 5 different locations. It reminded me very much of something like Yooka-Laylee, and you take that with either good or bad, because it got to a point in so after the second one, I had 2 ride-on Pokemon. I had a deer Pokemon, a weird deer, which is just like a horse so you can run fast over the fields, and I had a bear. It's an Ursa something. Ursa Luna? It's Ursa Luna.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm acting like I don't know the name. Which allows you to dig for treasure, but they're essentially the same type of Pokemon. So then the third world is called Cobalt Cove, Cobalt Coast. And I'm like, oh, so I'm going to get the ability to go on water here. And sure enough, I got the ability to travel on water. And so much of the first 2 sections had water that I'm like, okay, so the new priority for me in this freaking game is not to hunt Pokemon, it's to get all of the traversal Pokemon so that nothing's going to stop me from continuing through the world.
Yeah, feels very like with Breath of the Wild for me that I've learned that the right way to start that game is to actually go and unlock every tower first, so that when you do then finally play the story, you don't have to travel for 50 minutes between section to section. You can just fast travel.
Yeah.
Okay, I got to get the traversal stuff handled so that I can just play this game and not be miserable the whole time. Yeah.
So that's the thing. So then after the third area, I ran right into the fourth area. I ended up being the third and fourth area in like 90 minutes because I was just focused on that. I'm not going to focus on catching Pokemon. I'm just going to focus on getting the ability, because the fourth Pokemon you get lets you climb. So suddenly you can move vertical in these spaces. And then I'm like, well, let's just do the fifth one. And that one I did, same like very quickly because I'm just focused on the missions. I'm not focused on the catching of the Pokemon.
Right.
And that gives you flight. And then like that just sort of trivializes everything. And that's why I compare it to Yooka-Laylee. Because if you just bust through the levels until you get the powers from each of the worlds, like you go back to the other worlds with the ability to fly, it's pretty easy to get all the feathers and such.
Yeah, it's like it's not quite like a Zelda or Castlevania style or Metroidvania style. Like now you can get to this one particular area. It feels like it breaks the game. Like if what you're saying is this is what happened with me in Yooka-Laylee, it wasn't like a fun like finally I can get to these last few pieces because I've got this ability. It was like, oh, if I had just gotten this to begin with, I could have broken this game wide open. And so the next time you play it, that's exactly what you do, is like, you're like, fuck that, I'm just going to go break this game.
Yeah. And that's what I ended up doing with Pokemon. And then after that, I'm like, oh, well, now I'm at the end of the game. I'm just going to finish the game. And then I'll have every ability to move around. And I won't have like this weird ticking clock on me. But also, once you beat that fifth thing, spoilers for Pokemon, and it's not like a huge deal, but after you you've helped the 10 noble beasts, the sky turns red, and you lose all support from the Survey Corps that you're a member of, because they believe that you're responsible for it. So it becomes this weird thing where you're kind of pigeonholed into you have to complete the story before you can go back to the Pokemoning part of this game.
Yeah, I've been noticing that that's a kind of bigger, newer Nintendo move in the last few mainline releases from them. Starting all the way back with Paper Mario,
the Origami King?
Origami King. There's a moment in that where you finally get like Bowser and like there's a whole bunch of stuff that you realize that you can now do. And they tell you, they're like, you walk through this door and you're on a one-way path to the end of the game. So if there's anything else you want to do, like now's the time to go do it. And like they're good enough to tell you, but like it still kind of sucks because it's just like well, where I am at is such an inconvenient place that like if I were to go back and travel and do all of this stuff, it almost feels like weird, like the ways in which the game is like, oh man, like everyone is depending on you to get in and finish this fight, and you're just like, nah, I'm gonna go pound on some walls and see if I can find some more toads, thanks, bye. And like you can disappear for a few hours if you want, but like the first time I was playing through, I kind of didn't like pick up on that. Like I was like, okay, yeah, like let's go and finish this. My assumption being you'll let me back into the world after to like finish the rest of my stuff, and that's not really the way that game works. And I've noticed like since then that like Nintendo kind of gets into this vibe where like you hit a point in the story and it makes sense narratively why this has happened, but it does make you feel like you're kind of just like you're in the end game now, whether you like it or not, whether you've done everything you wanted to in this game or not, like you are in the end game now. Breath of the Wild kind of has that same moment as well, actually. If I think back even further than Origami King, it's a really weird thing that they've built in, and I think part of it is because noticeably all three of these games are very open world to the point where like the idea is like they want you to spend time dicking around and exploring, chasing Pokemon in the wild and that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And they feel like they need to build in this moment to make you finish the game, because otherwise, if they don't, you never will.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, Breath of the Wild, it's more once you go into Hyrule Castle, you're kind of locked into that part of the game.
Yeah.
But then after you do it, it starts you out before it, so you're able to explore. Origami King, I still have a sealed copy of. I haven't opened up yet because there's been other games that I want to play. But I'll put it on my docket for this year. I will, once there's a lull.
Let me know when you play it. I'll play alongside you, man. I've played through that game twice now already.
Yeah, so I will do that afterwards. But this one, like, it was one of those things where, like, okay, so I'll finish the game, and then sure enough, it's like, okay, now you have to do your other goal of collecting all the Pokemon. And I'm like, perfect. That's exactly what I want this game to be. Because now there's no pressure. I jump in for an hour a day, I do some Pokemoning, and then I'm done with it. It's not one of those situations where, oh, what's going to come next?
Yeah.
And the big thing, and what I had meant to ask you before we started recording, but time just got away from me, is if you're ever in a place where your mind is obsessing over something, and I was kind of there with Fight Club and Pokemon Arceus, listen to Sledgehammer by Peter Gabriel. Something about the way that song exists clears all that weight from your mind. It's how I was able to get a good night's sleep and be ready to the podcast today.
Nice.
But yeah, so Arceus, if you're on the fence, it's a lot of fun. But just understand that if you're going to focus on the story part of it, focus on the story part and then go back into the Pokemoning. Though, I'm pretty sure there is some gatekeeping to, like, require you to level up your character every so often. Because every time it was time to go to a new world, the head of the Survey Corps would be like, let me look at your Pokedex. All right, you've reached the level required where I feel safe you going into the Crimson Mire land. So
if you're not keeping up on that, if you're not, they wouldn't let you through.
Keeping up on it, I don't know if it's going to gatekeep you from going forward. But with a level 5 Pokedex, I was able to do everything through the story. And I don't know if it seems like level 4 would actually be the stoppage point for that. But I don't know that. But it just feels like once I was at level 4, that little dumb show of let me check your Pokedex. Yeah, you're good to go had ended.
Yeah.
All right. So last thing, and then we're going to wrap this one up. Chair Watch 2022 is over. I'm sitting in the chair right now. Is not perfect, and I don't know how to feel about that.
Dangly little legs just hanging off the edge.
Feel like MODOK. If I sit far enough forward, my feet touch the ground and I feel good. But if I go back and lean in it, they kind of hang just a little bit, and it's not great. Also, if I'm sat back, I can't really talk into the microphone. Like, Sejohn talks so that, there's not dead air. So
I'm just gonna keep
this
talking
is
while
me
Devon
right now
readjusted.
with my back against the chair.
It's not too bad.
And there's no way.
It's not good, but it's not too bad.
Yeah, but that's it. And I had kind of wished and I had hoped that the chair part could come forward, especially like they talk about all this customization, and this chair could be comfortable for somebody who's 4'10" to 7'5", and. No, I mean, I'm not.
Devon, but you forgot that you're 4'9".
I'm not 4'9". Don't be a jerk. Don't tell people I'm Danny DeVito's size. Not that I have any problem with you, Mr. DeVito. I'm not Danny DeVito's size. And as this is an audio, medium, Sejohn tells you something, you might believe it. Ruby, this is 2 weeks in a row that at the end of the episode you start meowing. I can't do anything for you.
Just telling you it's time to wrap up. Stop whining about your chair.
Yeah. It's just, I was listening to last week's episode and you hear her and she's not close to me. She's on the other side of the basement. She knows how to project. Ruby's my cat for anybody. And sorry to like lose the thread there, but she's meowing. I want to like be nice to her, but what am I supposed to do?
Oh man.
Sorry, losing.
Let's
the
get
thread.
back to the fact that you are legally required to be in a booster seat. You're so short.
Don't do that. But yeah, it's just weird. It's kind of like I had hoped that I wanted the chair mostly for posture, right?
Yeah.
And I don't like that sitting at the edge of the seat. I can't have the back up against it, like so it's still bad posture right now.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting up straight, but I don't have any support, and that's what I had kind of hoped for from this chair. So I don't know what I'm going to do. And it just stinks because you get excited about something, you build it up in your mind, and based on all the literature and the discussions you have with the company, it should do what you want it to do. And then it turns out, no, your body type is just weird enough.
Yeah, we've been looking into a whole bunch of like investing in some like real like adult furniture as we kind of are just kind of growing up over here.
Yeah, how else will you feel like a complete human being, Sejohn, until you buy the perfect furniture?
Got my IKEA magazine at the ready. Yeah, so we've been kind of looking into like, do we need new office chairs and things like that, especially now that we work from home. And I've been really fortunate in that all the jobs that I've been leaving over the last few years, as you guys have heard, if you've listened to the show, is that it's always been on good terms, and it's always just been like, hey, like this, this thing is happening, and the building's closing up, blah blah blah. Well, sure enough, the same thing just happened with this new job, and I didn't lose it. I'm still at my job, but they're closing the physical facility, right? I mean, we've all been working from home for 2 years. Why are they going to keep paying to keep the lights on when nobody's in there? And so they just gave away all this stuff in the office. And so like, I just ended up with 2 really nice chairs from work, as well as like another monitor and an old Windows 7 all-in-one that I've got to see if I can get updated. It might be my Windows 11 machine that for me to do testing on Windows 11.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it just, like silly stuff like that. But in that, we've realized like, hey, we've got some stuff together. We should try putting together like a new office space and all this sort of stuff. And we're going to be working on like looking into that sort of thing, and it is a bummer because like you get in your head like this is going to be a real piece of furniture that I'm going to spend money on, and it's going to be mine, and then I'm going to feel like a grown-up adult about it, and then it shows up and it's not quite what you want. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah, especially like to send it back. The worst part is that if I send it back, I have to eat 35% of the cost.
Oof.
And I mean, I'm not going to share how expensive this chair was, but know that it was no slouch. And like 35% of it, it's like, you know what? At that point, the loss is not worth it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we'll talk about it off mic, but just know that. But the one thing I will say, right? We're talking about chairs, and Sejohn's talking about we want to get new stuff. Don't buy a fucking gamer chair. Don't buy a gamer chair. They're a fucking scam.
Yeah.
And I will say that up, down, left, right. I can't use that one again, but it's just one of those situations where like, looking at gamer chairs and trying to find one that did everything that I needed, it was not possible. And then I looked into it and I'm like, well, let me look at office chairs. And then, oh, this is everything that I need. Look at the customability. Like this is the type of chair that a person who is an adult should have. Yeah. So don't buy the hype. Don't get a gamer chair. If you need a chair, look into an office chair. Look into a proper office chair. And
go to the right places, because the office chair market is also a bit of a scam, but that is mostly because they know that businesses will often be like buying in bulk, and it will be coming out of a business expense and not somebody's personal pocket. So you're going to find a lot of places where things are just way more expensive than they need to be because they can get away with that. But there are ways to find cheaper versions of stuff.
Yes. And that, I mean, I wish that's the case for me, but I mean, I got a custom chair. I had a chair built for me, which is why, again, it's a little disappointing that it's not perfect, because I spoke with people and like, this is what I need and this is what I have. And like, it should work perfectly. And then when it doesn't, I mean, here's the big complaint. It just didn't come with one of the instruction manuals.
Okay. Good luck.
Like, so I mean, then I go to the website and I'm able to find it, but on the day it's annoying to have like a detailed instruction manual for how to construct the base, a detailed construction manual on like how to assemble the seat part of it, but then to not have the back instruction manual.
I'm sorry, man.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I mean, yeah. And you expect a certain level, and it was a little disappointing. Though their website was a great resource, and honestly, if it had come with, I have like something else that does it. I think the monitor, like that nice monitor that I ended up getting, didn't have an actual instruction manual, but just a QR code and a website.
Right.
If that's what it was from the beginning, I can't be upset with it as long as that comes and it says this is how you get to your manual.
Right.
But when you're missing like an important part of it, like how to construct the back of your chair.
Yeah.
And
And no instruction on what to do otherwise, right?
Yeah. And especially like based on everything in the box, it looks like, oh, I don't really need any tools or anything. But then as soon as I find it, it's like, oh, I need wrenches and things. Like I didn't have those at the ready.
Yeah.
But now I own a really nice socket wrench. I'm gonna DeWalt, man. I feel like I'm back in the scene shop.
You gotta get one of them gators, man.
No, thank you. I'm happy to have this socket set and use. I have a broken wrench that I need to get fixed. It brought that to my attention because I brought out 2 wrenches and it didn't work. And then I tried a gator vice grip and it didn't work for what I needed. So. That's life, brother.
Oh,
I think that's where we ended. Anything else that you want to add to this episode, Sejohn?
Nothing too major. We got some Spider-Man's news. It's not official yet though, so we'll probably wait and talk about it next week. Just because we've been talking about the fact that I didn't think I was going to get to see it until it came out streaming, and now there's like the streaming wars for the $1 billion Spider-Man movie. But like I said, nothing's been settled in it yet, so it's not quite worth talking about. But just know that it's something that is on my radar as somebody that still hasn't seen that movie.
I know that I'm buying the 4K Blu-ray digital edition when it comes out.
Wherever that may be.
Well, I have it for everybody else. That's the problem. I have it for No Way Home and Homecoming because they're not on Disney Plus.
Yeah.
So I need to finish out by getting that 3rd edition. It's not going to be like the Venom movies where I was okay just digitally because they were like $5.
Yeah. I really do want to see it. I just don't know when I'm going to get the chance to. But no, that's it. Major stuff out of the way, I think.
All right, cool. Yeah, that's it. I think that's everything from us. Thank you very much for listening to the Say Report this week. If you would like to share your office furniture or chair mishaps so that I don't feel alone, you can find me on Twitter at Devon D. Decker.
And if you got any news on where I can watch my poor Spider-Mans, my poor Peter Parkers, then you can hit me up at Siege versus the World.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Have a great one. And Will, please bring us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devon Decker and Sejohn Sterwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report. And you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.